Hello, and welcome to the 12 Days of Tradmus. If you're new around here, my name is Kit, and Tradmus is a series I do in December where I talk about the harmful beliefs and ideas promoted by certain influencers, content creators, and so on. Basically, my normal content, but more of it and with a festive flair. And on the 6th day of Tradmus, we're discussing the transformed wife. Before we get into it, I would like to note that I don't know the transformed wife, and these are my thoughts and opinions on the content she puts out for public consumption. That being said, thank you for joining me, and I would like to give extra thanks to my patrons. The transformed wife, aka Lori Alexander, is she's been transformed into a biblical submissive wife who, for the past, 15 years now, has made it her mission to counsel women into how to be Bible-based submissive wives like herself. Though, allegedly, submissive to her husband, Lori's personality toward other women tends to be harsh and unforgiving. And sometimes I would think she's just trolling, but her husband did show up to defend her on a snark website some years ago, so I'm inclined to think that, brain tumor or no, she's actually serious. And yes, Lori has a brain tumor. From the sounds of it, she's had it for as long as she's been online, and possibly longer. And though I'm sure that must be terrifying to live with, that doesn't excuse the rubbish she posts online. And speaking of rubbish, Lori has made 2 unexpected friends since my last video about her content. Anthony Johnson of the Make Women Great Again convention, which doesn't seem to be doing well, and Pearl Davis, aka Just Pearly Things. And they're such good friends now that Pearl gave Lori her own Women Shouldn't Vote shirt. Her own modest Women Shouldn't Vote shirt. A year ago, Lori posted, "How can Anthony Johnson, who is not a Christian, love what I teach, interview me for 2 hours on his YouTube channel, and ask me to speak at his conference every year? Yet many Christian women despise what I teach. Is it because he clearly sees the harm that feminism has done, and they can't?" And a day later, Anthony posted, "You were born in objective reality. You live in objective reality. You will die in reality. And yet, the philosophy that guides your life is rooted in magic, mysticism, and supernaturalism, requiring the denial and enslavement of your mind with after-death promises. Bad idea, folks." He is very loud about his disdain for religion, but Lori still considers him a Christian in his heart because he hasn't been corrupted by the world or some such. I'm fairly certain she thinks that because they agree about women's place in society and think patriarchy is a good thing, because certainly his dismissal of religion and the fact that he has a baby with his fiancée, whom he has no intention of marrying last I knew, that certainly doesn't align with Lori's values. Though, honestly, I'm starting to think her values are just women bad. And that is the answer to her question. He can like what she says because they both come to the same conclusion. Women are bad and they need men to control them so they don't destroy the world. From Lori herself, "What good has ever come from women having a voice? Women overwhelmingly vote Democrat and for abortion. Women leave their greatest place of influence, the home, for the workforce. Children are raised by strangers. Birth control and abortion become normal. Divorce and single motherhood become common. Women become harlots rather than wives, mothers, and homemakers. Women owe 2/3 of the almost $2 trillion student loan debt. Women and children are more unsafe than ever. Nations fall." So, women having a voice only causes unspeakable damage to everyone, even to nations. And that is why women should know their place and stay quietly at home. Except Lori. She can have a platform because she's telling other women they need to stay quietly at home. Same with Pearl. It's okay for Lori to go on Pearl's million-plus subscriber channel because they both think that women should be quietly at home. Except themselves because they're telling women to do that. So much for being an example. But at least Pearl is willing to pay lip service to Christians, even if she doesn't actually believe. Honestly, Pearl and Lori are very similar, so in some way their friendship, mentorship, whatever they're doing makes sense, as opposed to Anthony. I'm pretty sure believing in Jesus is a big requirement for Christians, but apparently so long as you think women need to be under a man, that makes you a Christian in Lori's mind. Anyway, I'll link my commentary on Pearl's interview with Lori in the cards. Let me know in the comments if you think Pearl hasn't gone back to church yet, as she says she wanted and intended to, though I suspect that was just because she was talking to Lori. And let's see what the transformed wife has been up to. What to do about a husband who was verbally abusive? Every time he says something cruel to you, put up your shield of faith in front of you and ping those cruel comments straight up to to the Lord. Don't allow him to steal your joy, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. Remember that a soft answer turns away wrath. Find a godly, older woman who you can meet with on a regular basis to encourage you and give you wisdom. You can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. This means you can do everything that he commands of you. Yes, you can love and submit to him with a meek and quiet spirit. Pour love and grace upon him as Christ does for you. Show him Jesus. He's most likely miserable and needs to see the joy of Jesus in and through you. Remember, this is a spiritual battle. Pretty much what every woman telling other women they need to submit says. Be meek and quiet, and your husband will see Jesus in you, come to the Lord, and cease all abusive behaviors as he has now seen the light. I think we should segue from this to Lori's thoughts on submission. If a wife is using the credit card to put the family deep into debt, is it okay for her husband to take away her credit card and put her on a budget? If she's spending all day long on her phone and completely neglects her children and homemaking, is it okay to take her phone away and give her a flip phone? Or does the husband have no authority in the home at all? This entire conversation concerning the phone about authority and submission in a marriage proves how few women understand it nor want to be submissive wives. They'll only submit when they agree, but never when they don't. This isn't biblical submission as God commands. Most Christian women don't understand biblical submission. It's submitting to our husbands in everything as unto the Lord, unless they ask us to sin. Most husbands don't ask their wives to sin. Submission isn't only submitting when you agree with your husband, and it's not abuse if you disagree with what your husband is asking you to do if it's not sin. Submit to your husband. He is the head of you. Obey God. I do enjoy when they conflate husbands with God. The rational reaction to a spouse spending extravagantly or ignoring the family is to talk with them, work with them on fixing the issues, therapy, not taking away privileges like they're a child. You can't punish your spouse like you would a kid, and I'm both shocked and honestly grossed out by those who think you can and should. Women aren't children, and it doesn't escape my notice that when men aren't fulfilling their God-ordained role, women aren't to do anything to get them back on track. Wives are just to pray and hope God works on the husband's heart, because women's role is to submit, and that means going along with whatever the man wants. Unless it's a sin, and I'm honestly not sure what Lori would consider a sin so large a wife could be excused from submitting to it. Learning to love, submit to, and serve one's husband is not being a doormat, as many women claim. It's making our husband's life easier and better, yet many women submit to and serve their bosses every day and think nothing of it. You see how easily women can be deceived? I think it's obligatory at this point to insert a post from a so-called submissive wife equating work with marriage. They all do it. They all assume the boss is a man, and they assume all workplaces are authoritarian hellhouses where questions and pushback go to die. And if you do what your boss, who gives you money to be there and perform a job at specific times, says, why not do what your husband, who provides for you to be there and perform a variety of jobs 24/7, says? Except, bosses change. They quit, get fired, get promoted, and so do you. You quit, get fired, get promoted. Paid employment is rarely static. But theoretically, you love your husband and want to spend the rest of your life with him, so you build a life together. This analogy just doesn't work, and honestly, I don't think it should. At least in my opinion, you shouldn't view your spouse as your boss and your home as your place of employment. No one wants to live with their boss and be at work all day, every day. Men excel women in almost everything. Even the best artists and chefs in the world are men. So what? Feminism was built on envy. Envy is a destructive foundation to build a movement upon. Women are better at nurturing babies and children. Women make far superior mothers than men. Feminists want women to discount and discredit this, and they've succeeded as if anything is more important than raising the next generation. This is why Pearl and Lori get along. If it didn't have Lori's name on it, I could easily mistake it for a Pearl post. And you know, most of the comments agreeing with Lori are men. There's the odd woman here and there, but most of the "you're so right, if only women would realize" is from men. Despite Lori's assertion that she's not talking to men because she's a woman, she's not qualified to teach men, they are listening, and I would be willing to bet they're either implementing or trying to implement what she says women should be. Most of the disagreement comes from women like this beautiful response. So if men are better chefs as you claim, then they should be the ones cooking all family meals since it's where they excel. They should also be decorating since they are better artists, though you claimed women are inherent decorators. Thank you. It's always something to see when these folks come full circle to, actually, women are useless except to give birth. All those things I said women are naturally better at, actually, men are the best. though Lori is dishonest. There are women who are considered the best artists and the best chefs as well. And, funnily enough, Lori claims women just don't like truth, but no, truth is fine. Reducing women to wombs is not truth, it is dangerous. Reducing feminism to envy is not truth, it's just stupidity. Feminism isn't about besting men in competitions, it's about recognizing that women are people. If you had a father who wouldn't allow you to leave your house if you were immodestly dressed, too tight, too low, too short, too much flesh, you were blessed with a wise father. He was protecting you. Protecting from what? Surely men, who are better than women at everything except childcare and who are to be wise and thoughtful leaders of their homes, can control themselves when they see an immodestly dressed woman. Surely they can avert their eyes, recite a Bible verse, divert their thoughts. If men are natural leaders, should they not be exerting control over their minds and bodies to be a role model to other men, if nothing else? But this is a great example of all the perks, none of the responsibilities. Men are all things good and holy, and they should be deferred to. And if a man isn't doing or acting as he should, well, that's a woman's fault. She tempted him, she nagged him, she didn't pray enough. There is something wrong with the woman that is causing the man to stumble. I can certainly see how Lori's content appeals to a certain sort. Instead of women being barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen, bearing and raising children and feeding them nutritious food, they're running here and there like chickens with their head cut off and more depressed than ever before, while easily disposing of their babies in trash cans or daycares. That's quite a flight of fancy. I'm trying to make this work, but I'm having a hard time imagining women who get up, go to work, and then come home and maybe have an occasional night out with friends as running around like headless chickens. Lori, like classically Abby, has a great imagination as to what women without kids do without kids to raise. And, like with Abby, it's more imagination than reality. Also, kids going to daycare are not being disposed of. Good grief. Women were biologically created to be wives, mothers, and homemakers. They were born with eggs, ovaries, fallopian tubes, a uterus, breasts, and have monthly periods once they hit puberty. Their hormones fluctuate and were not created for the workforce. They suffer twice the stress-related diseases than men in the workforce. They were created for the home life. When they marry a man, his sperm and her egg meet to create a human life made in the image of God. It implants into her womb and grows until it is ready to be born. Then her body goes into labor. As soon as the precious baby is born, it will suckle at her breast. In marriage, she will not get STDs or need an abortion, but instead, she will be provided for and protected by her husband. This is God's beautiful design for women. And that is sex ed with the transformed wife. Anyway, it would probably blow Lori's mind to know that not all women are born with everything she listed, and monthly periods are not a guarantee after puberty in general, but they're also not a sign that everything is working properly. Everyone's hormones fluctuate, and no one was created for the workforce. Does Lori honestly believe that men were created to sit at a desk, stand at a production line for 40 hours a week for a paycheck? People have trouble conceiving and trouble breastfeeding, and you definitely can get STDs or need an abortion in marriage. I know Lori believes that only wanton harlots get STDs or abortions, but life is not that simple. Years ago, I mentored a young woman with a young child. She never said no to her child. She tried to convince me that using the rod was wrong, and I had raised my children wrong. I walked into her house one day and the high chair was up on the table. I asked her why it was there. Her child kept climbing up on it and she wouldn't say no to her. One time, she was pulling up plants from someone else's yard. I told her she needs to stop her child from doing that. She finally picked the child up and took her away. Another time, the child was running toward the street and the mother was yelling at her, "Stop light, stop light." The child completely ignored her. The child ruled the roost. The rod makes child raising far easier and more effective. God knows what he's talking about. Commenter: I've seen a lot of American men and women say disciplining a child is child abuse. Lori's response: American children used to be raised by the rod. This was when crime was low and children were loved. Mothers were at home and fathers worked hard to provide. Did Lori just wax nostalgic about being able to hit children? I do find it interesting that her judgment is all on the mother and she doesn't even mention the father. But this mothers were at home and fathers worked hard to provide and children were loved, it was a small amount of people who could afford that 1950s ideal, even in the 1950s, and you don't show love to a kid by hitting them. Also, the crime rate has been trending down, and is she really trying to say that if you hit kids, you'll have less crime? Because studies say otherwise. But of course, Lori knows that. And this is her response. It seems we are constantly being told how the studies prove that spankings are bad for children and just plain wrong. In fact, a 50-year study proved that spanking children is just as bad as physical abuse. I know this isn't true since parents have been spanking their children for centuries. I decided to look at the comments on the Facebook that shared this study, which isn't a Christian site, to see what others had to say about this article, and I was pleasantly surprised. And then she goes on to list people talking about how spanking is good, actually, and we need more of it. Wanting to spank your kids, or being a kid who was spanked and sees no harm in it, doesn't change the results of multiple studies, even if you declare them false. But this is the woman who wrote about spanking one of her children for 4 hours, so I suppose I shouldn't be surprised that this is her hill. Oh wait, Lori's husband cleared that up. Some time ago, Lori wrote that we spanked one of our children for 4 hours. What she should have said is that we had to discipline a stubborn child for 4 hours with some swats on the bottom, followed by long timeouts in her bed, until finally, about 4 hours later, the child did what they were told to do. There was no upset or yelling, the swats were not excessive, just explaining clearly to our child that they cannot say no to their parents in our family. To any sensible observer, the discipline will be considered reasonable, not very painful, but it consistently lasted until the child learned to obey. We found our children only tested us one time like this, and once they knew they could not win, they quickly obeyed. And we would do the same thing today if we were young parents, as consistency the first time your 2 or 3-year-old tests you almost always pays great dividends of learned obedience, except with the toughest of wills. And what happens when a child has the toughest of wills? Also, how do these people not see the danger in teaching their children to obey immediately and that they're not allowed to say no? I'm also not convinced that they didn't spank for 4 hours, since that was how Lori wrote it, and apparently Ken wouldn't have felt the need to set the record straight if not for trolls. People look to Lori for guidance. She needs to be more careful about what she writes, especially given even the Alexanders think 4-hour spankings are too much. And that's that. Lori is just the same as she was before, but now she has a new friend who has millions of subscribers. Great. And that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.